Hello, everybody. I like to start off these shows with a smile and a laugh because I literally look forward each and every Wednesday to bring this show to you live and direct. And yeah, shout out to all the divers, all the instructors, explorers, mermaids, photographers, and content creators all across our blue planet. It's February 23rd, 2022, and welcome to the Wade in the Water live show. My name is Weldon, and I'm hanging out here with my wonderful co host another week.
Hello, everyone. It's Jessica.
What's going on, Jess? How have you been this week?
It's good. It's been a good week. I've got some starting to look forward to the warmer weather coming up this spring and getting some diving in on the books. So it's always exciting this time of year. It's the hurry up and wait for dive season.
Oh boy, oh boy. So, where are we? We're in season 2, episode 7. 7.
Yeah, episode 7.
Yeah, just 3 more episodes to go before we take another break and dive into season 3, which we're really excited about. And I'll share those details with you guys in short order. But listen, first and foremost, we do this show for you guys. So, to all 38 or so of you that are on the live, our valued viewership, and to all of you that are watching us on replay or listening to us on podcast, thank you so much for all of your support, all of your engagement. And yeah, in the comments, drop us some stuff. Let us know where you're from, your favorite place to dive, what brings you to the show tonight. I mean, we're talking about ecosystem engineers. Um, yeah. So right now, what we're doing, just we are preparing for our wonderful guest, and I see her. Tanasia is backstage. Hi, Tanasia. But before we bring you to the stage, and we're definitely delighted. Hi, Keel. We got some comments coming in quick from my buddy Keel, who I think I'll see tomorrow. And Keel is from the Philippines, and I'd love to have him on the show to tell us about his diving experience because he's done some stuff, Jess, that I don't think you and I have done, like the hard hat diving, the serious
Oh,
commercial
cool.
diving.
Oh,
Yeah, so
awesome.
yeah, we'll flesh all that out. But yeah, tonight's topic is all about ecosystems engineers, and I'm gonna cue that up a little bit more over the next minute or so. But Jess and I have been running this show every Wednesday night. I sort of was like Wade in the Water Wednesday. That's the whole thing, right? Tied to
Ooh.
all those W's. So we do this live every Wednesday night on YouTube and Facebook with a replay available right away. And all our past episodes are available too, right at your fingertips. We stood up live.weldonwade.com. But since then, we've stood the show on its own legs. So it's got its own Facebook page, its own YouTube channel, and its own Instagram page. So we're building it while we fly, as I love to say. And I'd love for you to subscribe to those new platforms because we had it streaming to like my Facebook and my YouTube, and which it still does. We use StreamYard, and it allows us to broadcast to multiple destinations. So it's been fantastic building the show out and standing it up on its own. So, what is season 3 going to look like? Goodness, we don't know yet, but watch this space. We will be making some changes to the show. We did make the show a little earlier, Jess. We used to do this. It's funny. Every time we wrap this show, I have to remind myself and Jess that wow, we'd normally be starting the show right now. So we used to do
Yes.
this
Almost 2 hours
like
later.
yeah, like we used to do this show 10 o'clock Bermuda time and wrap late. And we pulled it earlier so that we can try to tap into some of our younger viewership. We had some feedback from some parents of some really amazing kids that were like, hey, if you did this show earlier, that would be great. So what helps the show grow? Sharing, liking, following, commenting, and subscribing. So if you'd like to be a guest like Tanasia is, she's backstage. It's wonderful to see her smile because I was getting a little bit worried, Tanasia. I'll be honest. I was like, Jess, what do we do? What do we do if there's some technical difficulties? But I'm broadcasting live from my blue room, which is in my home here in Bermuda, where I was born and raised. And yeah, I'm just really, really excited to feature our guest and talk more about which you might have guessed it. I mean, we did get all the assets ready for this week a little bit early. And if you hopefully you saw the post, you saw Asia was tagged, you hit that, you checked her out on Instagram, and you're like, oysters again? Jess and Weldon are talking about oysters again?
That's
Well,
right.
that's right. We're talking about these like living rocks. I said to Jess earlier before we went live on the show, I was like, it's really like it's a living stone, like almost this. What do you call them, Jess?
Bivalves?
Bivalves. But what I want to start off with is how much that I just didn't know about this side of things, right? Like I'm in the blue space here in Bermuda, and I do a bit of work across the region, and my focus has always been like plastic pollution and lionfish. And then I hear about oysters. We had our guest on last week talking about oysters, and then we had someone in our comments. And she was like, "Have you heard of the Billion Oyster Project?" And I was like, I said no, but then, we're live, right? So it's like, I think, but I'm not sure. Let me just, if she calls me out, I'm going to totally fail. So I was like, no, but I had started following Tanasia just a couple of weeks ago. So I was like, I know something about something. So I'm just really, really excited to have Tanasia Swift on our live show tonight, season 2, episode 7, entitled Ecosystem Engineers. Now, what I'm going to do is I've queued up something from Tanasia's Instagram page. It's a wonderful 3 minute and 15-second clip that was produced by Brood America. I'm only gonna play a little bit of it, Tanasia, because I don't want to get like a copyright strike or anything like that. That's happened before. We're building it while we fly. I was playing some production stuff, and my buddy WhatsApp me, and he's like, "Bro, your stream went down. You got a copyright strike." But I just think it's a wonderful piece. Like I'm just a huge fan. So just so you know. Jess, like what are we doing? Are we ready?
Yeah, well, and real quick before we go into
Sure.
that, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors for making so we can be here tonight.
Gosh, thank you for the reminder. So listen, this show really would be rough if we didn't have the wonderful sponsorship of Tele Bermuda International and Blue Wave, who's been a supporter from the beginning. So shout out to you guys, as well as our supporters. We've got Mammoth Lakes, Texas. We've got Atlantic Mooring Maintenance Limited, Uber Vita, and Current Vehicles, which is really, really nice. Current Vehicles have a fleet of electric vehicles. So I think, let's say 2014 and earlier, you couldn't rent a four-wheeled vehicle in Bermuda at all. Tanasia, if you were to visit Bermuda from New York to Bermuda, 90 minutes, JetBlue, you're on a scooter. You're on a little 50cc moped, nipping around some of the narrowest roads ever that were like originally designed for horses and carriages. And we've got like Honda CRVs in those same spaces, which is interesting. But now, since we had the America's Cup, that opened up the opportunity for entrepreneurs to have businesses by renting these little electric vehicles. You can get side by side ones, you can get ones where the passenger's behind the driver, and Current Vehicles are one of a handful of companies that have that. So that's just a long plug. Shout out to Piers Carr and the whole Current Vehicles family. Interesting. Piers is the owner, and his last name is actually Carr for real, like Carr,
Oh,
which is
that's
like.
amazing.
Now someone's like, "Well, you're Weldon Wade, like Wade in the water, and you wade in." I'm like, God, crazy. So we got a comment here. Henson says, "Hi, Aunt Jess."
Hello, Henson.
Hi, Henson.
See, it's one of the perks of moving it earlier is my
Hey,
nephew can tune in. It's
that's so
pre-bedtime
dope.
here in Texas.
Now I'm gonna share my screen and play this bit, and I'm gonna go full screen. Hopefully, there's no technical glitch, and hopefully, we don't get a strike. But to all 52 of you on the live, thank you so much. And I promise you guys to grab the audio, the edited audio from this live, because we're gonna like take out some of the clicks and ticks and different things, clean it up really nice, and put that into Podbean, and it'll be available on all podcasting platforms. That'll be really cool. Tanasia, I'm gonna run this bit. Let's see what happens. I getting a thumbs up. That's so cool. All right. I'm gonna share I'm gonna add to stream, yeah? And press play. Here we go.
In New York City, these are like our coral reefs. They don't move, but they do a lot for our harbors. We want to see them growing large. We want to see them surviving. And so far they look really good. I geek out about these things. So this is like super fun. I love it.
This is so dope.
We have these field stations around New York City. So I get the fun job of going out into the field, doing work alongside the community, putting oysters back into our harbors and engaging them into the work that we do.
I'm so afraid of getting a copyright strike. This is so cool. I'm like, well, they grab the audio, but it's got the captioning so we can read it. Maybe they won't pick it up. I'm being a little bit sneaky, you guys. Just give it a second. Read the captions, or I can read them. My voice wouldn't get a copyright strike, but we want to hear Tanasia's voice. I'm sorry. I'm just excited.
They essentially pull in water from the water column. They take in algae, that's their food, and then everything that is poop, they wrap it up inside of a mucus, and that creates this heavy particle, which then falls down to the bottom of our harbors. They develop these reefs, these 3D structures that fish and other critters like to hide and find shelter and food. And clearly these minnows love the reef.
All right.
Oysters act as a natural barrier between our harbors and our land. And so what happens is, if you imagine an oyster reef in water and a large wave just passing by, before it hits land, that oyster reef would essentially slow down that wave energy so that once it hits land, it doesn't cause as much destruction.
That is amazing. And guys, I'm just going to cut that video short. It's available on Tanasia's Instagram page. Just scroll down a little bit. It's there. I don't want to get a strike, but like, what the dope thing is, Tanasia is in the building. She's backstage. We're going to put this away. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce environmental scientist and ocean rock star, Tanasia Swift.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hey.
Hello, good evening.
Welcome to the show. And this is
Thank you.
and Jess, I'm sorry, but I've already talked to Asia about her coming to Bermuda. I kind of extend the invite to everybody because I just want everybody to come. So, and Tanasia's closer. So, I don't know how you feel about that. She may get here first.
That's all right. There's enough room for all of us. We're just all going to have like a massive trip. It's going to be great.
That's great. To all 51 of you on the live, thank you, Miss Tanasia Swift. It's wonderful to have you on the show. We're talking all about oysters, but honestly, I'm just super delighted and excited to have you here. And what I really wanted to learn from you tonight is where did you start? Where did this love for the ocean, this passion, because there's much more to you than just oysters. And even though that is our topic, it's where did you get started in all of this?
Yeah. How did you get into this awesome field?
Yeah, great question. I think so. Usually when I talk about my start and my love of the ocean, a lot of it kind of stemmed from just my childhood being near the waterfront with my dad. So my father was a fisherman in New York City. So we don't necessarily think of New York City as sort of like this coastal city, but when I was younger, we'd go to the waterfront, places around Brooklyn, around New York City, go crabbing for the most part. And that's where I really kind of got the water bug, if you will. And then from there, it kind of just blossomed into this curiosity of wondering what other waterways around the world are like, what's under the ocean, what are some, animals that I might not have in New York City, what those are like. And I would say probably when I was around 6 or 7 years old, I knew I wanted to go into marine sciences. But it was either I wanted to do swimming and be an Olympic swimmer or go into more so the science field. And then in high school, I went to this high school called the New York Harbor School, which is a public high school. It teaches students about various maritime careers. And when I was about 17 years old, or a little before 17, that's when I went to school abroad in the Bahamas. And it was first semester. That's when I was SCUBA certified. And since then, it's been, I guess, history ever since. So that was the starting story. And so my career has led me on to going into college to study environmental science. And then, after college, going on to do education work, and then landing a position at the Billion Oyster Project doing environmental education and then oyster restoration. So that's the short story. So.
That's fantastic. I love that your high school had programs that were geared towards maritime jobs in the future. That's so neat.
No doubt.
It was definitely a new high school. Like right now, it's called the New York Harbor School. So it's a public high school located in New York City. And many, at that time, it was a very, taboo thing to teach students about the harbors and our waters, and to have such a specialized school that was public. So definitely it's grown a lot. Now they have like a much more expansive career system, or what we call CTE, Career and Technical Education program. And sometimes I wish I can go back because the students are doing amazing things.
That's
Wow.
fantastic.
I got questions, but I think like many people, Tanasia, like especially in the diving realm, like Bahamas, if you've ever been, definitely leaves a lasting impression. And I still remember Lighthouse Point. I was in Eleuthera. Tell me a little bit more about your time in the Bahamas. I mean, let's get into it. And what I want to say real quick is, as a Bermudian, like, we're super proud of our island. Bermuda's super beautiful. And it wasn't until we got to Lighthouse Point in Eleuthera where I looked at my buddy Fred, who has been on the show as a guest. He was all in the comments early on. He may be on now. I looked at Fred and I was like, bruh, I think, yeah, Bahamas wins. And it's better in the Bahamas is like their tourism slogan. I was like, I think it's better here. Oh my God. My fellow Bermudians, it is what it is. Visit Lighthouse Point and yeah, it'll be, yeah, it's undisputed. But anyway, that's my bit. Tanasia, Bahamas. Where'd you go? What'd you do?
Yeah, actually, Eleuthera was where the school was. So I went to the island school, and it was located on Eleuthera. And it was basically a study abroad school where students are learning various things from, you can choose a research track. So I was doing the shark research track. They have aquaponics, they have, like culture. So you're learning about the history, the culture of Bahamians, the culture of the Bahamas. There is a segment where you're also working with students from the local schools. And when I say, like, that was my first time out of the USA, it was, it was absolutely beautiful.
Really?
And for that to be, yeah. And
That's a good first spot.
and Lighthouse Point was absolutely beautiful. I have stories for days. Just to give, one example, like every day we would either wake up to an exercise, whether it was running, swimming, run, swim, bike, which is basically you're running for a certain amount of time, then you'll hop on the bike, and then you're swimming across this channel to the other island. And that would be our exercise for the morning. And prior to going to island school, I wasn't really much into exercising at all. So it was definitely a challenge, but at the same time, you're in this like beautiful environment where you're doing this, in crystal blue waters, like you're seeing, sharks, and you're seeing like coral reefs, and it was absolutely amazing. We actually did a solo at Lighthouse Point, where we kayaked to Lighthouse. We set up shop there. So we had to put together our tents and tarps. We had to sort of, like, of course, build our own fires and ration out our food. And we would stay on a stretch of beach, by ourselves for, I believe it was 2 nights or so. And you get to just like really mentally prepare yourself and really get in your thoughts. But absolutely beautiful. I have so many stories for days, but it was phenomenal. And so since then, one of my actually closest friends, I met her through that, study abroad program. And so she's from the Bahamas. Shout out to Novi. And we, essentially we see each other every other year or so. So I visit whenever I can, like maybe every other year. So it's definitely a part of my heart, probably like a second home for me.
Wow.
That's amazing.
I just want to say to our viewership how amazing and powerful, like, the internet and social media is, and just networking in general. I do have a bit of a story for you, Tanasia. So, um, there's an organization in Bermuda called WaterStart, and it was founded by my good friend JP Skinner, and he's had WaterStart running now for a really long time. Let's say maybe 20, let's say 22 years. And JP, wanted WaterStart to evolve and be more than what it was. And so he looked around the region for something a model to replicate. So he happened to stumble upon Chris Maxey, and Chris Maxey had anyway. Shout out to the Island School. We formed a bit of a committee, and a bunch of us went down to the Cape Luther Institute and the Island School to sort of meet Chris. I mean, JP's been down there countless times, but it was my first time to Eleuthera. I didn't know that that about you, so that's actually really, really powerful. I've done the run swims. I could barely get over the wall. I scratched up my legs. Um, so that's why I thought I'd say, like, it's just amazing how we've met, and we have these stories that we can share about these Navy SEAL level run swims that Chris Maxey would put us all through, which is pretty wild. And yeah, Lighthouse
They
Point,
are.
stunning. So I guess just to wrap up that point is we did evolve WaterStart a bit, and got some really, really good news, because WaterStart, guys, is on an island in the harbor. It's called Burt Island. It's a little island, and there's structure there, and that's where the WaterStart program operates out of. They've got a couple of boats, and the program is running now. They integrated with some of the schools and stuff, so it's really, really wonderful. And I'm slowly seeing some elements that the Island School has put in, but no, like, goodness, I mean, the biopods and just the whole, it's a lot. I mean, even just the places that the adults slept, I was like, holy cow, the furniture is all made out of casuarina, which is invasive, but they have a lumber mill. I mean, we could have an episode dedicated to the Island School. That's really, really dope. And one thing I want to say, and this is something I did not tell you as a guest, is, I don't want to keep you very long on our show. So, typically we run the show for about an hour. But I think we should just get into it. So, ecosystem engineers, these oysters, these living rocks. I hope that's not disrespectful. Is that disrespectful? Tell us about, and I know I'm making a significant jump, but I'm really, respectful of your time, Tanasia. I appreciate you. Tell us how you got involved as the project manager for this Billion Oyster project, and it's crazy to expand on it, but like, do we almost eat these oysters to extinction? Is that what happened?
That's a part of it. So I'll start with sort of like the history of oysters in New York City and like why our oysters are even important. So New York City, the oyster industry in New York City was huge. Prior to even like Industrial Revolution, the Lenape, who were the first people here in New York and around the Eastern Coast, they were harvesting oysters for consumption, and they were a huge part of our culture. Long story short, with time, as we became more of an industrialized waterfront, so a lot of the wetlands and sort of like natural harbors began to be dredged out. And we started to, like disrupt a lot of that habitat, literally digging up and dredging out sediment to create wider, more, I guess, stabilized shorelines for big boats and barges to come in.
Right.
A lot of that habitat began to be lost. And as you mentioned, overharvesting. So oysters in New York City were very popular. So we used to ship, a lot of our oysters even over to, places around the world because they were just so well known. And so there was a whole industry behind oysters in New York City. So we began to overharvest them to the point where they couldn't reproduce on their own. And then as more people began to move along the shorelines, we were beginning to use the shorelines for various things. Pollution became a huge issue. So without having an infrastructure in place to sort of like manage this pollution and places where we can dump our trash, the easiest thing at that time was to just dump it right into our harbors, out of sight, out of mind situation. And so those three things are sort of like the three things that we talk about when we talk about the decline of oysters. So overharvesting, dredging, and then also just like overharvesting, dredging, and then pollution.
Sure.
So with time, like as the Clean Water Act came into place, people started realizing, okay, something has to be done. People are getting sick from this pollution. People could get sick from the oysters that we're eating because of the pollution. And then we're starting to see species of fish and different animals start to decline. So they put a ban on harvesting oysters from New York City since the 1970s. So around that time of the Clean Water Act. And long story short, organizations like the Billion Oyster Project are now trying to repopulate the harbor with oysters for the ecosystem benefits, not for consumption, but to bring back habitat and to connect people to our harbors. So how did I get involved in the Billion Oyster Project? So as I mentioned earlier, I went to New York Harbor School. So this, school was a way of getting New York City students to the harbors, learning about that history. And one of the topics that we learned about was oysters, restoring oysters to New York City. These ecosystem engineers, why are they so important? And at the time, I just thought of it as sort of like a fun trip, right? Like you're going to the harbor, you're doing some science, you're collecting data, but that was it. And then you realize how important, or just making the parallel like I made in that video of oyster reefs in New York City to something like coral reefs in the tropics. They're huge. Like they play a huge role in protecting our waterways. They have a huge role in providing habitat for fish. And I knew that, that was something in my heart that I wanted to do, because of my love for marine sciences. And it's also my hometown in New York City. So I get to work in Brooklyn. I get to, ride around the harbor in boats. I get to work with New York City students. So it's like I'm doing the marine sciences in the place that I love, mix the two together, and you have like this amazing career and job opportunity. So I've been with Billion Oyster Project for about 5 years now at this point. We first started in 2014. Still very small, I guess, relative to other organizations. A small organization that's growing, and it's been history ever since. So
That's awesome.
Jeez. I mean, go ahead, Jess. I'm sorry.
I love it because we live so far apart. Like I'm down here in the Houston area, you're all the way up in New York City, and oysters are so important to our coastline here in the Gulf Coast as well. And so it's so exciting hearing about everything that you're getting to do in New York with the Billion Oyster Project, and how you're getting to get the kids involved, how you're getting to work in the area that you love. I think that's so cool, giving and like you're getting to give back to get people interested in their own habitat. And I think there's something really cool about that. But I love that there's these parallels between, even though we live geographically very far apart, but oysters are so important and impactful. And they have oysters on the Pacific coast as well. But yeah, we have a project that's kind of similar. That is the Galveston Bay Foundation, and they have some oyster reef rehabilitation. And again, it's just like you said, it's not for consumption, but it's just to rebuild those reefs. And they have like cool volunteer opportunities. And I love that that's happening in New York, because like you said, not everyone, whenever you think of New York, you think of like the city and everything, but it's an island. It's island, just like Bermuda, just like Galveston. And so the waterways are so important. So it's so exciting what you guys are doing there.
I think is really cool. I mean, we don't have oysters in Bermuda as far as I know, but I love your comparison, drawing parallels to coral reefs. I mean, we have, Bermuda is essentially surrounded by some of the healthiest coral reefs in the region. And, whenever I hear about, mangroves and corals and things acting as essentially breakwaters, storm surges is one of the most, devastating things that Bermuda has to deal with hurricanes. And it is our rim of coral that breaks those waves down. So by the time it reaches shore, it's broken down. But even before all of that, just the habitat our coral provides and all of that stuff. And even though we can't consume coral, we do consume some of the critters that keep it healthy. So one of the things here, Tanasia, that you'll discover when you visit Bermuda, because I'm thinking I may come to New York and hang out with you for a bit, and then you come down here, especially like islands. We've got the connection with island schools, so it'd be dope to get you to meet JP and the Waterstar family when you're here. Obviously, like that has to happen. But we protect parrotfish. Parrotfish eat algae, which keeps that in check. And we did do a bit of over harvesting on our platform with snapper and grouper and that kind of thing that keeps damselfish and other things in check. So it's a lot that goes on, but it's this delicate balance of, yeah, we want to eat, but we also, don't want any sort of collapse or trophic cascade that causes any issue where, we're like, okay, well, we're in trouble because our coral reefs are dying for whatever reason. And yeah, that's such an amazing parallel. But it's just, for me, it's mind-boggling, just like it was last week, to just think about all this. They're definitely doing some really, really amazing things. These critters in the water doing stuff to buy, what do you call them, Jess? The
Bivalves.
bivalves.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
They
That
they
can't
two
stick in
halves.
my head. It cannot stick in my head. But I did make a reference because I've seen different things online, Asia, where you've got muddy water, you put oysters in there, in time they clean it up,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing. So
Filter feeders are pretty cool critters.
and when I think of New York, like, I totally don't think of, I can't wait to go for a dive, or I can't wait to get into the water. It's sort of something that, I don't know if it's overlooked, but I'm used to seeing like crystal clear, well, Eleuthera water. You know what I mean? We've got similar water here, though it's way clearer down there. You guys, just saying. Like, what's the most like interesting thing you've encountered in the 5 years you've been working? Like sort of an aha, wow type moment out in the field. Found anything cool? Seen anything dope?
Yeah, I mean, just to your point in terms of like New York City's waters not being necessarily like the crystal clear waters that we think of, which is definitely true. Like, we do have this like brown and greenish hue to our waters. And I like to explain to the students and whoever comes out into the field with us, like, a part of the reason why that is sometimes it's due to pollution, but also because we have this abundance of like algae, green and brown algae that creates this like dark color. So there are, organisms that you can't see with the naked eye that's creating this like ecosystem of just like different life. So yeah, so definitely agree. It's probably not as crystal clear, but definitely has its benefits. And in terms of like some of the coolest things, let's see. So a couple of stories. So of course it's New York City, right? We do have an issue with pollution, a huge issue with pollution. So you do see things that don't belong in our harbors, like derelict boats and shipwrecks and things that have sort of like been abandoned. Sometimes occasional tire and like shopping cart. But you also see things like seahorses. So there was one time we were scuba diving. I don't get to scuba diving in New York City, just for complete transparency. And I think this video is maybe on my Instagram page, but we're scuba diving in this little bay called Jamaica Bay. And it's, full with wetlands. It's, one of the areas that has lots of life, but it also has a history of pollution. And then you also have JFK, John F. Kennedy Airport, right across the water. And so we've had this oyster reef that was planted in Jamaica Bay for a while. And we were going down, usually we go down and have students survey the bottom of the harbor of the bay to see if they can find any oysters that have essentially recruited or planted themselves near this reef. And so we were scuba diving, and it's a pretty green dive, right? You can't see, but maybe, I would say like maybe 3 feet max in front of you.
All right. So like the diving here.
yeah, it's not that clear, but it's a part of it. And as we're, going across the line, I see this like seahorse that's just hanging out. And it was super cool because, like, a lot of times we don't think of New York City as this place where there's lots of organisms. And I was super excited about that. Once again, I geek out about some of the smallest things. But just seeing that seahorse kind of like just hanging about with this tail wrapped around that line was super interesting. And then another story, I share pretty commonly. I'll tell 2 more short stories just so that I'm not taking up too much time.
Oh no, that's what you're here for. We love it.
There was a time, so in the Bronx, which is another borough within New York City. So anyone who's not familiar with New York, it's 5 boroughs. One of them is the Bronx. And we were walking along, me and my buddy, Ryan, we were walking along the shoreline, and we saw this cool gold skull. And the gold skull, usually, I'm imagining, oh, that's Jamaica Bay. Yes. Thanks for pulling that up. So literally on the, I guess, the eastern side of Jamaica Bay. You can see the airport just to the north. Yeah, right where your arrow is where I found that seahorse. So it was a pretty cool experience. But going back to the story about the Bronx, we were walking along the shoreline. I found this like goat skull, and I have a table. I actually have it. It's kind of like broken up, but I'll pull it out since we're here. So I had this goat skull for a while.
Oh, okay, a goat skull, guys. It's a goat. Okay.
I thought that was like a term for something else. I didn't know you meant like a literal
what type of fish?
skull.
A goat
I was
skull.
like, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a literal skull. I mean, it's been a little beat up since I've had it, honestly. But this skull, I had it for a while, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. It had a face at the time. But I picked it up, and I essentially, had it and was walking around with it throughout the day. And then I realized in the nostrils of this goat skull that there were oysters spat inside of the nostrils of this goat skull. So spat just being another word for baby oyster. So when oysters are really small, they actually swim around until they find a place to settle onto. So they have a few weeks in their lifespan where they're actually free swimming, and they're attached to something. So the current moves them, and when they're ready, they're attached to a hard surface. And so I thought that was pretty cool, not only because the skull itself looks like something that, you can hang up on your wall or something, but the fact that the oyster was just, just settled onto this piece of skull was kind of like art in a way. So that's another story that I typically tell and I like to share. And then the last, quick. Yeah.
I just wanted to just to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the spat. So we call oysters that haven't like recruited, like latched on, spat.
Well, once they've recruited, they are spat. So it's just a term for a really small oyster.
Okay. So once this oyster does find a cool place to kind of be, it's there forever?
Correct. Yes. So it's there forever, unless it's been knocked off or what have you, but it attaches to any hard surface, which normally is other oyster reefs, but it can be anything like rocks or pilings, which are common in New York City. A goat skull, apparently. So any hard surface they can essentially attach to, but oyster reefs, they prefer other oyster shells.
Okay.
Which is why dredging can be such a problem, right? Because then you only have that like soft, silty bottom. There's no hard structure for them to attach to. So that's why you guys are collecting oyster shells like we do here to put back in the water for them to attach to, right?
Correct. Yes, exactly. Awesome. So if, a harbor is dredged, like not only is that sort of like taking away a lot of the hard surfaces, but it also kind of like can cover that sediment that's, moving around in the water column, can just cover a population of oysters. And they're filter feeders. So they need, like water to sort of like pass over them in order for them to eat. But if they're covered, they essentially kind of like can't eat and filter as they would. But we do have a program where we're recycling shells from restaurants. So if you go to a restaurant in New York City, a lot of the restaurants that we partner with, they give out their shells after they've eaten oysters back to us. And then we take those shells, we'll dump them onto a space, usually on Governor's Island, which is off of the southern tip of Manhattan. And it's like a big mound of shell, honestly, like a mountain of blank shell. And then for a year, we're essentially sterilizing these shells so that it gets to the point where there's no food, no marinara sauce on it, and the sun is sterilizing it. You have, of course, other factors like rain, so natural factors that are helping to sterilize the shell. I have an oyster shell behind me somewhere, but to the point where they are ready for oyster babies or larvae to essentially attach to. So
awesome. That's really cool. So what is your third story?
Oh, the third story will probably just be seeing humpback whale in New York City. I've been obsessed with them since. So New York City, as we begin to have cleaner waters and cleaner harbors, a lot of species of fish are starting to come back, like the Atlantic Menhaden. And the Atlantic Menhaden is sort of like, I consider it like an indicator species. So once you see this Atlantic Menhaden, like the population or the water quality in New York City is becoming a little better. So there has been this boom in Atlantic Menhaden in the last couple of years. And things like sharks, rays, dolphins, and whales eat menhaden, right? And there are now whale watching tours that you can do from boats off of the coast of New York City, even to the point where you can go on the beach, a beach in Queens, and literally see, whales breaching from the beach, which is like unheard of in New York City. And I've lived here my entire life, and it wasn't until my adult years that I've kind of like seen that happen. And you're seeing like a pod of dolphins just kind of like swimming from shore. And my mind was like blown. Like, like we think of New York City as just having so much diversity when it comes to people, but now we're having like large mammals come into our harbors. And that's absolutely phenomenal. That makes me like love it even more. So
That's so neat.
Wow, that's so powerful. I mean, right now down here in Bermuda, we're pretty close to you guys. We are having a humpback whale migration event that's happening now. My buddy Brandon Fleming, shout out to you, Brandon. Salute. He was out fishing and boom, whales. So might be some whales that are pass by Bermuda on occasion. That's really really wild. And yeah, like New York. When I think of New York, I think of concrete jungle where dreams are made of. I don't think of like whales and dolphins. It is really really amazing. One of the things, Tanasia, that I haven't brought this up before, Jess, was I did spend quite a bit of time in Vermont, and I have dove Lake Champlain, and that was my first sort of freshwater lake diving. And one of the things we did encounter quite a lot were the invasive zebra mussels. So I mean, New York, you've got your oysters that, and you're doing this wonderful work with Billion Oyster Project. But are there any invasives that you're dealing with as well?
yes, so we do have some invasive species that we kind of like, they've kind of like made home here in New York City.
Right.
One particular species is not like a fish, it's actually a plant species called Phragmites. And basically this plant kind of like takes, like most invasive animals, they kind of like take over, or species rather, they take over sort of like the space where native plants are, known to be. And so Phragmites, they're essentially really invasive to the point where you'll have a shoreline begin to, they help stabilize the shoreline to some degree, but then they also overrun, lots of our shorelines and wetland to the point where, like they're taking up native species which were once known here. So that's one species that we're kind of like dealing with on a regular basis. Another one that has been big is the Asian shore crab. So the Asian shore crab, the Department of Environment Conservation has even put out a sort of like a warning or post about these. If you find, and they're little crabs that essentially, once again, take up a lot of habitat and food for native species. And so they are typically found in various places around New York City. I've seen them in various places, and even some of our oyster reefs. So they're a problem as well. But to be honest, the everyday person, I can imagine like fishermen in Bermuda, invasive species like lionfish might be a huge deal to them. In New York City, it's not as common just because there isn't a large fishing population. We do have lots of fishermen, but it's not to the point where these species are taking out large fish populations that folks fish for.
Cool, interesting, and I'd love to talk more about the fishery the next time we have you back. I mean, there's just so much that I believe we can expand upon and just share what we know. Certainly, you touched on the lionfish invasion. Lionfish, even early on in the invasion, they love habitat, and we have a really significant lobster fishery. These guys put lobster traps down on the bottom, and the lobsters go to the trap, and if that lobster trap is surrounded by or has lionfish inside of it, the lobsters tend not to go into that artificial habitat to then get hauled and sold. So we did find early on, like, wow, these lionfish are displacing lobsters. And at that point, as a fisherman, you have to decide, okay, do I handle these lionfish and potentially get those to market, or risk getting stuck, right? So it was very difficult to promote our eat 'em to beat 'em campaign when fishermen were catching them in large numbers in these pots. But certainly you don't want to risk getting stung, so they would just whack it and throw it back. And we're like, no, that's $13 a pound. But that was, we weren't the people working the front lines in that particular space. So we had and continue to have that issue, and who knows what effect it's going to have. Because right now around here, they eat these red night shrimp, That's their most popular meal item up here, and every island has their own thing that they're dealing with. But we don't know what that little red night shrimp does. Like, we can't count them, we can't ask them what they do, we can't see what they do. When you guys come diving with me and we go off Warwick Long Bay or John Smith's Bay and go through some of the swim throughs with our flashlights or our torches, it's the little red eyes you see reflecting back at you. And when you get close, they're gone. If we do a night dive, we get a little bit closer, but these little shrimp, and it's just interesting how much or how little we really don't know. It's pretty phenomenal. And just talking to you, Asia, it's like how little I really know about other places, and New York is super close to Bermuda, and I really had no idea about all of this. So thank you so much for sharing what you shared so far. 5 years at the Billion Oyster Project. Family, for all of you guys that are tuned in, Tandy, thank you so much for your comment. Listen, drop in any questions or comments or queries you have, however you stumbled upon the show, YouTube or Facebook, my page or Jess's page. If you have any questions, feel free. But what we also have, if you're watching this live or on replay, we've got all of our social handles. So please follow Earth Asia 524 on her Instagram page, and certainly Diving with Jess. I'm just going to add this to the stream. We've got Asia. What is that? Your whole thing. That's not one oyster.
It's not. It's a cluster of oysters. So that's at one of our reef locations, so in Brooklyn. So I like to say oysters are growing in Brooklyn. Yes, we have these native oysters. So one of the spots in Sunset Park, we have these oyster reefs that are growing inside of like a bagged shell reef is what we call it. So they're aquaculture mesh bags. When oysters are essentially planted, we have the shells, sort of like the baby spat, or once again, baby oysters all over them. We place them inside of the structure, and with time, they begin to grow and create this 3D structure, which is why we're also calling them engineers. So that's one of the oysters from a baby, that one wasn't a baby, but like a large oyster reef that we've pulled up, we've monitored. And yeah, so that photo, we were out with Imani Black. So she is the founder and CEO of Minorities in Aquaculture. So she came out to check out one of our reefs, and a lot of our staff members at Billion Oyster Project there that day. So it's super cool to see this stuff like in person. We do field days for essentially anyone who wants to get involved. There we go. Look, yes.
We're doing it, man. Like, we are here to promote, amplify, and follow. Now, Tanasia, I certainly don't want to cut you off, but we have a question. Jess, you want to pull up that question?
Yeah.
Jessica in Bermuda.
We have a Jess who says, how old do you think a cluster like that would be?
Yeah, so that cluster was about 3 to 4 years old. So when we first planted them in, they were really small. And then with time, the oysters begin to grow, on their own and create this like 3D structure. And I also have some videos of oyster reefs, I think, on my page as well. So you can check that out as well.
All right, now I'm struggling to figure how I got that bigger. Like, it was bigger and now it's not bigger. But anyway, Mr. IT will fix that at some point. Wow.
So for people who want to get involved and be a part of the Billion Oyster Project, what ways can they reach out to you guys, or what type of volunteer type opportunities or internship type opportunities do you guys have?
Yeah, awesome question. So a lot of our work, so we're based here in New York City. So a lot of our work is geared towards New York City residents, New York City students. That's sort of like our target audience. And so students or schools, community scientists who want to get involved with us, they can reach out directly on our website. So depending on what it is that you want to do. So for schools, they can come out for a field visit. They can adopt an oyster cage or what we call an oyster research station, or RRS. For folks who want to volunteer, we have public volunteer days on Governor's Island where you can come out and help build some of the structures that we work with and we're planting oysters in. We have water quality testing programs. So essentially, whatever round that you want to go and whatever your capacity is, we have something for you. If you're a restaurant and you want to help to donate your shells to the Billion Oyster Project, that's an opportunity as well. We have free curriculum online. So I would say, depending on who you are, what you're planning to do, definitely just check out our website. If you're looking for like a field experience, I'm always like telling my friends, like, come out to the field, come out to New York City. Like, if you guys are ever in New York City, I'll be happy to show you one of our reefs and, you know, help to plant more oysters. So either
That's
way, reach
awesome.
out to me or check out our page.
My gosh, like perfect answer to that question. I'm like I'm trying to find a pen that writes, and then I'm trying to take notes, and you're just like boom, boom, boom. However you want to get involved, boom. And I was writing. I finally was able to write down the word adopt. So I'm guessing anyone anywhere in the world is able to, first of all, hit the Billion Oyster Project online, find your website, Google you guys, it'll come up, and you can adopt a patch of reef. And you had an acronym for that.
Yeah, so it's mostly the Oyster Research Station, so ORS, which is the
Yep.
acronym. Is basically
Oh.
it's in New York City. So we have a community science program. So what most people call citizen science, we call community science. So we just use the term community instead of citizen. So a way for community scientists to essentially collect data. So regardless of your age, you know, like you can be in first grade. Sometimes we have young students who are doing this with their parents, or you can be someone who's retired. And we train you on how to take care of your oysters. We have a permit that allows for oysters to be planted within New York City. So you have to be local to New York City within the region to collect these oysters, to plant them at a local waterfront site, and then share that data back to us. So the work that we're doing is basically community science, getting people who are everyday individuals, may not have a science background at all, so that it's easy for you to digest, collect data, and then share back to us.
That's amazing. I love that. Have you got to do any work with your former high school?
Yes, I didn't mention this and I should have, but the Billion Oyster Project actually grew out of the New York Harbor School.
No
So
way.
so the students at the New York Harbor School, so in 2013 or so, the New York Harbor School, I should just mention, just shout out to New York Harbor School, because they have 7 career and technical education programs, from vessel operations, professional scuba diving, aquaculture, marine biology research. And students are learning these, I didn't name them all, but students are, you know, picking one of these 7 career fields. And so they're trying all of them out in their freshman year. Sophomore year, they go into one of those tracks, and they're staying on that track for the remainder of their time at New York Harbor School. And so in the aquaculture program in 2013, the teacher at that time, Pete Malinowski, who was actually our founder and the founder of New York Harbor School, decided that oyster restoration can be turned from a student project to an entire nonprofit. And we work really closely with those students. So some of those students are scuba diving at our reef sites that we have around New York City. They're driving the boats around New York Harbor. They're, you know, leaving high school, either going into a college of their choice or going directly into the field of their choice. And so it's super cool to watch them in action and see them scuba diving, like there they are now. So it's super,
amazing.
it's an
Oh
amazing,
boy,
amazing high school.
mind blown. This is wild.
That is so like beautiful and full circle that like this came out of the high school that you went to and now you work there and you get to give back. That's absolutely beautiful. I love it.
That's pretty wild. For those of you listening on the podcast, I'm just sharing the screen of the NewYorkHarborSchool.org, and it is really, really awesome. I'm also sharing the website of the Billion Oyster Project, and it is wonderful to hear from Tanasia Swift, the program manager for the Billion Oyster Project, graduate of the New York Harbor School, who has also spent time and learned how to dive at the Island School at the Cape Eleuthera Institute, who is born and raised in New York, Brooklyn.
Yes, best
Brooklyn,
side.
stand up. Oh my dear. This is so awesome. Wow. The vision of the Billion Oyster Project is a future in which New York Harbor is the center of a rich, diverse, and abundant estuary. The communities that surround this complex ecosystem have helped construct it, and in return benefit from it, with endless opportunities for work, education, and recreation. The harbor is a world-class public space, well used and well cared for. Our commons. Well, this is for me, Asia, it's super inspiring, to see how your journey in this blue space has evolved over time, and you're still super young. Like, it seems like you're just kind of just getting started, man. I'm 44, by the way. I'm the old man in the room, so it's like, goodness. I had a birthday on Friday. It was crazy. Um, but yeah,
Belated.
it's thank you. And I love kind of marinating on the community science versus citizen science, and I like that. I like that as well. And it's great that there are opportunities for the community to get involved in the science side of things. And certainly, this is one of the biggest questions that I get with the different things that I do in the community is, how can we help? So whether if you're physically present in a particular uh, country or area, there's different ways you can go about doing that. But it's such a big world. A lot of my the viewership of this show and my followers on different social media platforms, the majority are actually not in Bermuda at all. So it's always like, in terms of storytelling and the narrative, is it's like, yeah, this stuff is for people across the planet. So I have a lot of people in Asia and super far from Bermuda that are keen to see what's going on here. And certainly, goodness, everyone knows about New York, and this is just really, really cool. I can't even tell you how many times I've been into JFK Airport, and I don't think I realize how close the ocean was. It's just south of the airport. Why didn't I know that? Or was I just not paying attention? I don't know. So
Too
so
busy
certainly,
looking up at the skyscrapers.
just like wait into, I don't know. I don't know. I was in New York just recently. There was a storm, guys, like 6 months ago. It was this is gonna be kind of interesting. So it formed in the Gulf, and it hit New Orleans, and then it kind of surprised the East Coast, and it flooded New York, and like the subway was shut down. What was that, Tanasia? Was it Ida?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was and it was crazy because lots of New York City was flooded. Like you've probably seen stories online where you had subways just like flooded, people kind of like waiting in the subway trying to get down steps because it was just like so much water. And just even bringing it further back, like from Superstorm Sandy, once Sandy hit, which was like a huge storm that devastated New York City, I think that's when people realized and it clicked like, okay, we are a coastal city. Backyards were flooded, subway systems were flooded, folks, lost, a lot of their homes, their property. The New York Aquarium, which is on along the shoreline, it was flooded. So many people
Oh,
realize the severity of, like climate change and these big storms and the frequency in which these storms were happening. And so a part of the work that we're doing is not only trying to get folks to understand, like why this is happening, but also having a connection with the water because nature is going to take its course regardless of if we want it or not. And
yeah.
if we, like have, community members having a connection to water, understanding how it works, understanding water quality, then that would hopefully make us more prepared, at least generationally, for how to be more resilient. So yes, that is correct. These storms are hitting New York City at a much faster rate, and they're becoming more severe. And so hoping that people, residents, community members, just anyone who's here in New York City realizes that, cities are not excluded from, climate change and sort of like the things that are happening just on the coastal level.
Yeah, super powerful. And I actually flew into New York the day after that storm, and I wasn't sure that
Mm,
JetBlue was going to fly. And when we landed there, the subways were still shut down. I stayed near Columbus Circle. It was an interesting time and an interesting experience. But yeah, the coast is super duper close, and certainly Bermuda, we're like surrounded by the ocean, right? We're stuck in the middle of the Atlantic here, which is pretty wild. Tanasia, I think I could talk to you for another hour at least. But we do have some comments. JD Simons, good friend of mine, he says, I now have a new reason to go to New York. Pick me, I volunteer. Me. So that's pretty dope. And JD also comments, diving and driving boats. Me. Now, JD might remember, I think it was Sunday, a guy in a white Chevrolet Spark pulled over and was yelling at you, JD. That was me. I was kind of pointing at the smoke coming out of your old Yamaha outboard. Reliable, but a bit smoky. I was like, oh, those are two strokes. What's going on? So yeah, JD, I saw you. He was at the helm. JD, Tanasia, he's with the Coast Guard. So when we finally get you and Jessica to Bermuda, which would be dope if it was at the same time, we'd meet JD and I'd put on my Bermuda Ocean Prosperity cap and we'd pull rank and get into the Coast Guard, whether JD likes it or not, and have a little tour, maybe go on a boat trip.
Watch out, JD, we're coming.
We're coming. We're going to take over, man. We do have another comment here from Jess. How do major storms affect the oyster populations? Jess, powerful question. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, so oysters are relatively pretty resilient. And so so the reason why we're planting oysters, not only, to help filter water, but acting as a storm barrier for major storms. So oysters don't necessarily prevent the storms from happening, but they can help to sort of like protect our shorelines. So imagining if you have more great infrastructure, like things like concrete, or just like a vertical wall that's, along the coastline, water is just going to pass over that and it's going to go directly past that shoreline of concrete structures into our communities, into our basements. And if you have more absorbent material like wetlands and oysters helping to slow down that water, it'll essentially protect the shorelines in our homes so that wave energy, kind of like slow down before it even hits our communities and into our streets. So that's how essentially oysters kind of like help to slow down wave energy and protect our shorelines, but they don't actually stop the impact of storms from happening. That's a much larger, discussion. Yeah.
Sure. And I would imagine well, no, I can't really, but I would think like these things are we have mussels in Bermuda and I do see the mussel divers using like a hammer and a chisel. Like you have to actually really hit these guys to get them off the rocks. I would think that the storm surge may not even move the oysters, but maybe move the structure that they're attached to, especially if they've recruited on oysters. We're not talking about like bedrock. So it's just really interesting to expand my mind on it as a community scientist who just does stuff. That's really, really cool. Jess, any what's going on? You have any questions for Tanasia while we have her?
Yeah,
And,
so
I want to
so
have her back.
along those lines of how do major storms affect, so I know here sometimes we'll have issues in our oysters that are further up. So we have oysters that are closer to the Gulf of Mexico, but up in the large Galveston Bay complex, we have some that are along kind of the inward side of that. And whenever we have like a lot of flooding, sometimes all that excess fresh water will have some negative effects on our oysters here. Do you guys have any issues with that in New York?
Not necessarily. Like we have, so a lot of our reefs that we plant out are mostly for educational purposes, just, for full transparency. So we have oysters that are for restoration, some that are for educational purposes, which they're not as large in terms of the size or the acreage that they cover. So if they were to get large enough, or the reef would be large enough, would help to prevent some of that erosion, as I mentioned. And in terms of like freshwater, so New York City's harbor is an estuary. So we have fresh water up north and then sort of like the salty water coming in from the Atlantic. So it's sort of like brackish, a mix of fresh and salt water. But a lot of the oysters that we have, like we can't actually plant them but so deep, just because the light can only penetrate but so far, just because of the visibility or turbidity of our waters. And the only time that we have, and they're pretty resilient in terms of like the water quality itself, and the only time we would have sort of like an increase is I guess we do have an issue with bacteria. So that, I guess that would be the parallel between New York City and sort of like the Gulf. We have a really old infrastructure. So the water and pollution that goes through our toilets, our homes, from our streets, they're all combined. So when it is heavy rain, a lot of that, instead of going to a waste treatment facility, gets dumped directly into our harbors. So there's an overflow to the point where some of it can't be treated and we have to dump it directly into our harbors. So there's this increase in bacteria. So that's one issue that we do have in New York City. and which makes our oysters, like we can't eat them, so they're not edible because of that reason. But once again, we're not planting them for that reason, but mostly for the ecosystem benefits. I don't know if that answers your question per se, but yeah.
Yeah. All right. And we've got one more question in the comments from Jessica. And she says, thank you. Does the sand silt displacement from the storms cover them and prevent the bivalves from feeding? So, and we kind of talked about that in regards to dredging, but this is more specifically with the storms.
More natural.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that is true. So sand and silt can cover an oyster reef, kind of like preventing it from filter feeding. We haven't seen like a major storm kind of like destroy some of the reefs that we've placed out. They've pretty much, withstood a lot of the storms and things like that. But in terms of the death of some of our oysters, that can be attributed to various things from, some certain diseases, or just like being consumed by natural predators. So not attributed to, the storms that we have here. And so once again, like with Billion Oyster Program, we're relatively new. So we're looking at, so a lot of our reefs are just about 4 years old. So I think with time, we'll have more data to look at. I was literally just thinking about this today. So looking at areas that we've planted our reefs and seeing how various storms kind of like impact them. So far, we've had a great look of success and survival for our reefs. After major storm events, they're still in place. Structures still look good. But as we go along, that may change. We're not too sure, but a work in progress.
Indeed.
Awesome.
I did want to add this to the stream real quick. If JD is still on the live, JD, check out billionoysterproject.org. How to volunteer. I love this. I saw on here, Asia. Some really like amazing options that seems to cover everything. Become an ambassador, contribute as a community scientist, or plan a corporate volunteer day. So you're hitting on the individuals or families that may be keen to getting interested, that are keen to get into it. And then for the businesses, small and large, I guess, can do a corporate volunteer day. Check the mound of oysters. Yeah, again, I'm just sharing the page on the stream for those of you listening in. And the COVID stuff and why oysters. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Tanasia.
Another way that is not directly on our website. Sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
As mentioned, we do work really closely with the New York Harbor School. And so, with cities, or I guess with big cities, there is the big city syndrome where, there's everything here in the city. So you might not want to leave and explore. But, like if there are programs out there that you're interested in getting some like students into, or you have resources specifically for students, I'm always being an advocate for, youth and student education. So if there's any way, or programs that you recommend, scholarship, feel free to send them my way. That is another way to participate and get involved. So let me know.
It's fantastic.
That is amazing. So cool. I want to put our banners back up for our viewership. Guys, please follow us on social media. It all helps, and it's free. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to just like and give us some hearts and some smiley faces and some encouragement, because this work is necessary, and it's always nice to kind of get a bit of get some love. But Tanasia, I certainly don't want to keep you very long tonight. I want to thank you for your time tonight, for jumping on our show. And we're building it while we fly, but it's been great having this platform to be able to meet you, get to know you, and certainly amplify your message across the world. Our viewership is pretty like everywhere. It's pretty amazing. And to all 46 of you that are on the live right now, thank you so much. Like, wherever you might be, like, you could be anywhere, but you're here hanging out with us tonight, which is great. Learning about ecosystem engineers and oysters and everything that they do for our planet, which is great. Jess, I don't know what we're going to talk about next week, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But
I do.
You do? You know what you're talking about next week? Like, what are we talking about next week?
We're going to be talking about some sea turtles next week.
All right. That should be exciting. Tanasia, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. We really appreciate having you here. And thank you for adding so much value to all of our viewers. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm definitely going to take you up on offer to come to Bermuda, so I look forward to that.
Sooner the
And you're
better.
welcome down in Texas anytime.
That's amazing.
There we go. Phenomenal. All right. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Tanasia.
All right. Bye.
Bye. I really love how this show is bringing all of us together like this. It's just so cool. I'm just learning so much, and that's kind of why we started this, Jess, in a sense, is to share what we know, but also learn.
Yes.
I'm a lifelong learner, and just I honestly didn't know Tanasia went to the island school. And as soon as she said
That
that,
is so cool.
I was like, Chris Maxey and his wife were in Bermuda. I've been there, been to Lighthouse Point, been to Eleuthera, got the shirts and stickers. I was like, let me grab a sticker. Like, it's official. Once you've got a sticker, it's it's proof. Show your receipts. That is so wild. But yeah, I'm happy to wrap up tonight's episode if you are.
Yeah, I just think it's great. I think this show really showed no matter where you live, you can find a way to get connected to your environment. So even in like the concrete jungle of New York City, there are still these amazing grassroots organizations that you can go and get connected with the water around you. And so just kind of keep that in mind wherever you live, wherever you are. Just do a little bit of research, kind of Google around and find out what really awesome people might be in your own neighborhood that you can go and get involved with.
And there's so much you can do, whether or not you want to get wet. You can stay dry and really do some really impactful stuff. You can get wet up to your knees doing some cool things in different bays and marshes and mangroves. Or you can put on some dive gear and
Get wet to your gills.
yup. Guys, I got to go. Jess, you gotta go. Have you had dinner? You did. You did.
I'm good. I'm good
I
this
saw.
time. Usually not. Usually I'm starving by the time the show's over.
Guys, I'm
Y'all
gonna
come first.
I'm gonna cue up our little intro outro thing, but before I do that, I want to give you guys like just a couple of seconds. If you have anything you'd love to add in the comments, let us know. Just a few seconds, just to kind of let. And Jess Kellery, thank you so much for jumping on the live. JD, I appreciate you all the time. We had Tandy Jones, we had KSG, we had my buddy Keel earlier in the show. Shout out to Fred Swan. I didn't see you on the live, but you may be one of the 45. I don't know. Hope so. Yeah, lots of really dope content coming to you guys in the future. And when I get a little bit of spare time, which I don't have, doesn't exist in my life, I will certainly get the audio from these wonderful shows and toss it into Podbean so you guys can listen to the content via podcast. So building it while we fly, but really enjoying what we do as well. And with that said, that's it. Yeah.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. Guys, we are gone.